Well, it's been more than a year since George Floyd's murder sparked a lot of change and a lot of discussion, especially when it comes to the way that companies were looking at diversity within their own offices. As much as all that talk had amounted to not a lot of change, at least according to a new look at USA Today, at some of America's largest employers when it comes to diversity. And for more on that, happy to bring on USA Today tech reporter Jayme Fraser, who joins us right now with the results of that look. And Jayme, when we look at it, I mean, obviously, Black and Hispanic workers out there make up a pretty significant chunk of America's workforce. But what does it look like when you dig into the tops of some of these companies?
Yeah, so there's a big difference between what the top of the companies look like and what the bottom of companies look like. 1 in every 97 white workers is an executive at the 54 companies we reviewed, but only 1 in every 443 Black or Hispanic workers holds a top job. And often you'll see that while Black and Hispanic workers are underrepresented at the top of a company, they are overrepresented at the bottom of companies.
So what does that suggest in terms of where some of these pledges stand? I mean, I will admit to being quite skeptical. In the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, we saw all the protests. Immediately, corporate America, feeling the need to respond, came out with the pledges. But are we actually seeing the ball rolling, even if the changes haven't happened yet?
So there's definitely more pressure on companies than there has been in a long time, if ever. It's coming from their boards, it's coming from shareholders, it's coming from consumers. And particularly after George Floyd, some workers within companies feel more empowered or feel like they have to sue about workplace discrimination. They're willing to take those risks to their careers. In terms of improvement, it's really hard to gauge because the primary way this is tracked is in a record at the federal EEOC that is they refuse to release. It's under lawsuit right now, whether it's a public record. So the data we have is, primarily a snapshot in time for companies that released their most recent EEO1 form. But we do have some records going back to 2013 and 2014 for a handful of tech companies. And we see there's not been significant improvements there. There have been some, but as these companies grew, they tended to, continue these same patterns of inequalities. And what's interesting to me is that tech companies, are in such a new industry, but they're repeating the same kinds of disparities that you see in much, much older industries like banking.
Yeah, and I mean, at the same time, they've been some of the most outspoken in trying to, put a push and emphasis on diversity. So it would be surprising to maybe see them not live up to that. But when it comes to maybe why some of this has persisted, they'll always point to a gap in education or perhaps, skills that are necessary for some of those jobs. But, I guess some of the catch-22 there is also that these applicants can't be qualified because they've never been given the chance. I mean, how much of it is really on the idea of maybe regulating some of this diversity push from above the company level?
So as a data reporter, I'm not in the nitty-gritty of proposals for regulation right now, but I will say that while companies like to point to hiring as a challenge, and there are some challenges there in terms of the ways they frame who a successful or experienced candidate is, right? Maybe the qualifications they're listing aren't really necessary to do a good job, but are actually reinforcing some of these disparities. But studies have shown that, women of color in particular are often down-leveled. So they're hired into positions that are below their expertise and experience. So there's, some unconscious bias at play at the hiring, but there's also significant issues with inclusion. It's not just about bringing women and Black and Hispanic workers into the workforce. It's about keeping them there. And whether your company culture is set up to help everyone thrive and not try and, force people into, frames that make them feel uncomfortable or can be actually hostile or harmful to them.
Mhm.
And you can read all about all the data that Jayme uncovered in USA Today. Jayme Fraser, USA Today tech reporter. Good to talk to you today.